You know what's funny? For the longest time, I thought dragging was just slower clicking. That's it. I honestly thought it was one of those personal preference things. Some players click, some players like to drag. Who cares? The target gets selected anyway. Then one day somebody asked me during a fight, why are you dragging extent of clicking? And my first thought was, I don't know. I've been just always done it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. The best players I know aren't dragging because it's comfortable, they're dragging because they're collecting information. And once I realized that, I stopped looking at dragging as a movement technique. I start looking at it as a scouting technique. And for the longest, what I was actually doing with my legions is, for example, I was going outside, going to deploy a couple of legions. It's going to be this, like, let's say, these legions. And what I was doing was I was grabbing everybody and I strike, for example, these Darkling patrols. But the reason it was not only for striking, but also was for escaping. Because for some reason I was thinking when I drag, the things happen more faster. And when I decide where I'm going to go, I can have the full control over the movement. But in the same time, you can do it just by right-clicking. You can basically do the same thing. So it was something like a preference back in the days. But yeah, from my personal experience, about a time that I was dragging, it was just a preference, nothing behind, okay? Nothing behind. And sometimes it was like one idea more easy. For example, if there is a infantry here and next to the infantry there is a mage and I want to target the mage, by dragging, I can actually target the mage because you're not quite sure when you do a right clicking, which one you're actually targeting. Sometimes, as you can see, there is something like white things around the target when you hover over the target. Sometimes that was giving information, but to be 100% sure, this is the second reason I was just dragging my legions at the end of the day. Because here is the thing. When most players enter a fight, they think they're choosing the target. When most players enter the fight, they think they're choosing the target. But what if choosing the target isn't actually the first decision? What if the first decision is understanding the battlefield? Because those are completely different things. And I think most players skip the second part entirely. They see red, they click red, the fight starts. But the players getting the best traits usually aren't doing that. They're looking first. And that's where the things get interesting. And one of the fights that the outcome can start completely changing when you're doing the dragging and checking out, the targets is actually to checking out the targets. Because the moment you're doing a dragging, right now you see Darkling patrols, but in fights you're seeing different heroes. You only see the commander, obviously, but you see also the HP. This is extremely important information because it's completely different if you target. I'm going to just give an infantry as an example because the majority of the cases we're fighting against infantry is one thing if you select downfield or you start attacking downfield or maybe Garwood, is completely different thing if you start attacking Kuma Legion or, for example, Goresh Legion. Even Joran Legion. Joran is having crazy infantry counterattack. Damage bonus can go up to like 20% and stuff like this. I mean, it's one thing to attack heavy counterattack legions, and it's completely different when you attack some mid shields. The outcome is completely different. The other thing I can say is the amount of HP the legions are having. You're not only seeing which hero you're targeting right now, but you also see the amount of HP that this legion is having. The less HP they're having, the less counterattack they're going to do to you. and the more advantage you're having against Legion with less numbers inside. So yeah, this is one of the things that's actually a real example of a fight where the target selection changed completely the outcome. The moment you start targeting and killing the infantry one by one, not just going for the full HP infantry, it makes huge change for me. The first thing dragging give you is a health information. And honestly, that sounds incredibly boring until you realize how many fights are decided by finishing damage. Let's say you have two targets. One target is almost dead, the other one is full HP. Most players see two enemies. Good players see two completely different opponents, because removing a march from the battlefield changes the fight. Damaging a march doesn't always change the fight. And that sounds obvious, but when battles get chaotic, people stop thinking that way. And recently, I actually do that maybe the past like 3-4 seasons, when I was checking the HP of the legions, and by killing the low HP legions, it just reduced the amount of infantry present as an infantry icon on the battlefield. So it's one thing when you see on the battlefield you have like 10 infantry in the front lines. You cannot zoom and check it out how much HP those infantry are having, but imagine somebody actually take out all of our infantry that are on low HP and that are easy to be killed. So from like 10 legions, you end up like maybe like 4 or 5 full HP legions. Five legions are completely taken out because they was on very low HP. So now you start behaving other way. I mean, the behavior of the player change when there is less infantry. You start watching around if somebody going to jump on you because there is just not that many infantry to stop him, and things like this. It's hurting the confidence because the players are only seeing these icons. And the other thing is obviously the results I'm getting when I'm striking the full HP legions. It's just crazy, but it is what it is after all. So this is an example of moment where I start looking at the health bars completely different. Then I realized health bars were even the most important thing. Troop type might be the most important thing, and that's where dragging become much more interesting, because now you're not asking who can I hit, you're asking should I hit it. Very different question. If you're running certain mage combinations, some targets create dramatically more value than others. If you're running splash damage, target selection become even more important, because suddenly you're not attacking one march, you're attacking a battlefield position. And I'm going to share with you my personal experience that made me questioning my target's priority. And this is when I start facing those cavalry. This is one of the moments. I'm going to show you one report. Now, this is a report when I use my cavalry. This is Nea Kuma and with Venom Lizard. It's crazy the amount of damage this thing is doing. And the only thing the enemy is doing is just hitting my legion. Look at this thing. 5k on my side, 26 on their side. Like 9k, 18k. And even though that this is a marksman. Like this one, even support legion actually get better results here because of the counterattack. And if I open the battle summary, like 400k is the counterattack. So you start seeing that if I attack, especially max deco players that are sending Nea with Kuma in your direction, or even Nea with something that surprise you, it's just the amount of damage you can receive. Nea with Mosrok Auroch, for example, crazy amount of damage you can receive. It's just crazy amount of damage you can receive. So this is one of the things that I stop actually attacking those targets because they're hurting my mages big time. Big time. The other thing is, about the splash damage. When you're Dracula Legion, if there is like full HP, your base and couple of legions at same position, you start hitting the lowest HP, and after this you switch to the next one and next one, and you prioritize them by HP. Now, when I actually attack full HP legions or like 50% HP legions is when my artifacts are ready to fire up. Because the moment I take out my Mirage Orb, brother, this thing is like armor piercing shell. Is 6,000 damage. I definitely want to get the full benefit. On top of that is having some increasing of the artifact skill damage. I really want to hit something that is going to take my full damage, not some dying legion. This is also help you to actually get a target for your artifact. It's just like not one side about the target priorities. Then things got even more interesting because dragging also help identify heroes. And I think this is where a lot of players incidentally throw away value. You see a march, you attack. Then halfway through the fight, you realize, oh, that's not who I thought it was. I've been done that. Oh, I have been done this a lot. You think you're engaging one matchup, then the heroes appear, and suddenly you realize you're in a completely different fight. The damage expectation changed, the survivability expectation changed, the trait changed, everything changed. And the scary part is that decision was already made before you realizing it. Then I start noticing something that completely changed how I look at area of effect damage. A lot of players think target selection is about the target. Sometimes it's about the target around the target. That's a huge difference. And I'm going to give you an example. What I'm currently doing with my mages is one of the ways I'm also fighting against mages is since the mages are going to do to me like 100. The infantry in Call of Dragons right now is doing way more counterattack, I think, from the mages. So if there is a mage and infantry next to the mage, and you know, more mages and more infantry, I'm trying to hit the mage that is next to the infantry. Like this, my splash damage that my heroes are going to do, it can be Yuming, it can be you know, some other AoE damage dealer like Lilia or Thunderlin, and with the splash damage, I'm going to hurt a legion that is hurting the legions that is attacking them. So basically, heavy counterattack legions just by attacking the target next to them, because just by dragging, I have an information that this legion is most likely like this. When you see Kuma, most likely we're talking about this type of legion at the end of the day. So let's say you're running a march that loves splash damage. The best target isn't always the strongest enemy. The best target might be enemy standing in the worst positioning. And once I start paying attention to that, my thinking changed completely. Because now I'm not looking for heroes, I'm looking for questers. I'm looking for mistakes. I'm looking for opportunities. The target become part of the big picture. That's when I realized something else. Most players think dragging is a mechanical skill. I don't think so. I think it's decision-making skill. Mechanical skill is clicking faster. Decision-making skill is gathering better information. And information win a lot more fights than the speed does, especially in large-scale PvP. Because in the giant fights, almost everybody can click. The difference is who understands what is happening. And dragging gives you a lot more understanding before you commit. And this is mostly happening with the casual players. I'm going to give you like my opinion on why many players undervalue information in PvP. It's not because they don't want to get this information. It's just they just want to, you know, there's nothing wrong. People want to enjoy the game and not overthink over the game, what is happening, who they're attacking, etc. They have like their legions, they go outside, they want to hit the enemy with the hope the enemy get more casualties and they win the fight. The majority of the cases like this, just Just so many players undervalue information that they can get in PvP. Then I start watching how different players engage, and the pattern appear. A player who get catch the most tend to decide first and observe second. The players who survive longer tend to observe first and decide second. That sounds like a tiny difference, but it changed everything. Because once the fight starts, mistakes become expensive. Before the fight starts, information is free. And dragging is one of the easiest way to collect that information. And one of the real examples of bad engagement that can be avoided is when you're seeing on the battlefield what kind of heroes are in the front lines. Imagine you want to be. Sometimes people get greedy, they go with their legions and they want to hit the mages behind. But if you see, you can see how many infantry legions there in the front lines. If there is like maybe 4, 5, 6 legions, I will not actually do that. I'm not going to go and hunt mages. Why? Because there is a chance those infantry to have blink and to catch my 5 legions. They're going to sacrifice like 2 infantry legions. I'm going to sacrifice 5 legions. So sometimes the greedy, sometimes this is actually a real example of bad engagement that can actually be avoided. This is more positioning, but in the same time is also again the full heavy counterattack damage dealing full HP infantry legion. This is also something that you can actually avoid if you gather some information by dragging to this legion. Which create another question. If dragging give more information, why don't more players doing it? And honestly, I think the answer is simple. Information feels slower. Clicking feels faster. And most players confuse speed with efficiency. But those aren't the same thing. A fast bad decision is still a bad decision. A slightly slower good decision is usually worth a lot more, especially when you're trying to maximize traits, merits, and survivability. The funny thing is that when somebody first asked why I drag instead of click, I thought the answer would be mechanical. Maybe habit, maybe comfort, maybe muscle memory. Now I think the answer is completely different. Good players aren't dragging because they're trying to move differently. They're dragging because they're trying to see differently. They're gathering information, they identify heroes, they check health bars, they look at the troop type, they look at the positioning, they look at the splash opportunities. They're making decisions before the fight starts. And the more I watch strong PvP players, the more I think that's the real difference. Not faster clicks, better information. So now I'm curious. When you enter in the fight, are you selecting the targets or are you first trying to understand the battlefield? Because those two approach might look almost identical, but I think they create very different result. Anyway guys, that is for this video. Huge thank you to all channel members for supporting the channel. If you do like to support the channel as well, you can check out the join button below. Members get early access to videos, exclusive content, member shoutouts, and Warwords member can reach me out directly for strategy and account advices. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one.